All right, welcome back. Gary from Refinish Media. As always, we have David behind the camera. You guys wanted him back, so we pulled some strings and we got him back. We have Jeff Matauch, formerly from PPG. Thank you for joining us again. We normally don't have, this is our first time that we ever had somebody come back, especially so soon. But we had so many emails, so many DMs, so many people that wanted us to get a little bit deeper into paint and body. You're a painter by trade, as am I, as is David. Of course, we're going to take the opportunity to talk about paint and body because that's what we love the most. But thank you for coming back. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get into this, and I'm a little amped up today. I apologize. Sorry, not sorry. I'm on a little bit too much cough medicine and stuff. I just wanted to talk about Jeff and his background. If you have not seen the first video, we'll put a link in the description. We'll try to throw it up on the page. But you can watch the Jeff Matauch interview #1 first. We're not going to get into a lot of stuff in there that we went in. We want to go through some new information and stuff. But I do want to talk about Jeff's background a little bit. And I don't want to waste a half an hour going over, all of his certificates and degrees and all the good stuff that he's did. I've been doing paint and body for over 30 years. I'm a 4th generation painter, body tech. I've been teaching at a college for over 25 years. I've met anyone and everybody who's great in this industry. And in my humble opinion, and I'm not saying this because he's sitting 5 feet to my left, there is nobody as knowledgeable as Jeff. And I'm blessed to have him on here. Usually when I have a paint or body question, there's only 2 or 3 people in the country that I can trust and bounce them off. And my first phone call is always Jeff. And I don't know if you knew that or not, but you're the guy that I always call when I think about this situation or that situation. So that's what I think about Jeff. You guys, I'll let you guys decide on your own if he knows what he's talking about or not. So we wanted to start off with restoration and customizing. We're going to save collision and like the used car stuff maybe for later. Because, there's a market for collision and used car stuff.
Absolutely.
But let's start off with high-end restoration. And basically for the do-it-yourself guy or even the shops out there is step 1, you got the car, and how important is it to wash it and assess it? I mean, especially if I'm just going to sand all the paint off anyway. Aren't I going to sand all the dirt off? I mean, what's going on with that?
Well, if you purchase a car or you have a car that's been sitting around for a while and you really don't know where it's been, what's been done. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy stuff that can happen to cars. I mean, look at Armor All. People use that stuff like crazy. You wouldn't believe how far that stuff travels. I mean, maybe the Armor All isn't used, but any type of dressing, anything that rejuvenates, usually it has some form of silicone in it.
Yeah.
There's other contaminants out there that just land on a car, and you don't know what's on that car. That car might have old nasty paint on it and you just start going at it with a sander or a grinder or something like that. You're driving whatever contamination is in that car or in that finish, that surface, into that car. Whether you choose to strip it all the way down to bare metal or not, but still it's getting into the pores of that thing. So that's why I think it's critical when you first take on a project. First thing you do is soap and water wash works real good at the very least. If you don't have access to a hose and a bucket, you should.
Yeah.
But if you don't, at least a waterborne degreaser and then maybe a solvent degreaser to follow it up.
Yeah, I remember years ago when I first started taking classes with you at PPG Wixom is in my 18-year-old head, it's like I don't need to wash it. I'm going to sand that dirt, that grime, those waxes, those coatings, whatever. It's going to just turn into dust and float away. And then when you explained how, no, you're basically just taking those contaminants and you're driving them into the substrate and they could bounce back. And not always, they don't 100% of the time get you. But when they do, it's
one thing I'll tell you is I've been doing this a long time. I started messing with these cars when I was like 15 years old, and I'm going to be 63 next month. So I got a few years, and it's always been a passion. I've done it my whole entire life. And if I tell you something's going to go wrong, it's probably because I've done it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, no, it's funny because
Because nobody knows everything when they first start out, you know, and we, yeah, you know a lot. Okay, that's because I've screwed a lot of shit up.
absolutely. And I mean, washing it with a good Dawn dish soap or Simple Green or whatever,
Sure.
it's very easy. And then, like you said, is coming in with like a wax and grease and or a waterborne and hitting it. I mean, one, it makes your paint work clean and contaminant free, but two, you also get to kind of become familiar with it. Like tacking a car, and I know this is off topic, but tacking a car, yeah, I'm getting a little lint and dust out, but also when I'm tacking it, I'm kind of inspecting it one more time
Sure.
to make sure that everything looks how I think it's going to look. So that's one of the reasons why I like to be real diligent about washing them. A lot of guys use microfibers now to wash cars instead of sponges.
Yeah, I've
You
seen
like
a lot of that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I have done that. It works pretty good.
All right, we get the car washed, we get it dried, we degrease it. If you're using PPG, we used to call it DX330. Now it's SX330.
Yeah, they changed the line.
And then if you use a waterborne after it, is there any particular waterborne you like? One more than the other?
Yeah, I guess if I'm going to say the PPG line,
Yeah.
there's actually two. There's SX394,
Okay.
which is the one I like,
Okay.
and then there's a SWX350.
All right. And just for you guys out there, is we're not pushing PPG. Jeff doesn't work for PPG anymore.
That's the line I know.
Yeah, he knows PPG. I know PPG. I respect BASF. There's other lines out there.
Do they still make pre-cleano? That's
Yeah.
900. That's good stuff. You know.
And maybe you're using some middle of the road stuff. Right now, we're going to talk high end, the best of the best in the PPG line, but there's nothing wrong with other people's lines. If you use, let's say, BASF's line, follow their tech sheets, their P sheets, whatever you want to call them. Make sure that the products that you're using are interchangeable. You know, don't be using Sicken sealer and PPG's primer and Glazer's clear.
Well, cleaners are pretty
cleaners,
standard. Yeah.
Don't be using Dawn and then Ajax. No, just kidding. So you come in and use the solvent and you use the water, and then obviously we go into, like, let's say, disassembling the car.
Yeah. It's going back to cleaners a little bit. I do like to use two different cleaners, water and solvent.
What's the difference between the water?
Well,
and
the
the
water
solvent?
cleaners will take waterborne contaminants off, dust, dirt, coffee stains, anything that is water soluble, you know, whereas a solvent cleaner is more for grease, oils, waxes. Will a water cleaner take that stuff off? Kind of, but not as good as a solvent cleaner.
Okay.
And I can tell you for sure that a solvent cleaner will not remove a water-based contamination.
Okay.
So that's why I use both.
Yeah, I mean, I know forever that we just use the solvent-based wax and grease remover, pre-cleano, whatever you want to refer
Sure.
to it as. And a lot of people hate on waterborne. You don't have to use it. If you don't want to use it, that's fine. I think it's better.
Use window cleaner.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Safeway?
ammonia.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
Safeway?
mean, it'll clean it. It's a water-based cleaner. Yeah.
Yeah, the safe way.
Windex, whatever, you know.
The safe way is the one that everybody, like in the airbrush world, that everyone swears by Safeway, and that's the one that's been out there forever.
The 394 water-based cleaner has got soap and ammonia and stuff, and usually what I do is I cut that 50-50 with just water.
With
You
some
know,
distilled water.
yeah, because sometimes it's too strong
It
for
leaves that
what I'm.
little residue.
It can leave a residue, but there's some cases when you want it that strong.
What do you think about this? I know a lot of guys, they'll wash it with soap and water first, then they'll use their waterborne cleaner second, and then their solvent first or third. That way, if there
That's
was
fine.
a little bit of residue, like the solvent kind of takes care of that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all.
Okay.
In fact, sometimes I do it that way.
Awesome. All right, so we get it cleaned, and obviously we R&I it, remove and install, we tear it down or whatever. What's some of the mistakes people are making when they tear down their cars? Like, I mean, in my opinion, the taking it apart and the labeling is a super important
very
step,
important.
and a lot of people miss it.
Yeah, how long is that car going to be apart?
Longer than you think.
A lot longer than you think. I'm over a year now on one that I'm doing, and I thought I'd have it done by now. And
So what's some of the tricks that you do when you take things apart and label them?
I usually use Ziploc bags and by section, I will put all the nuts and bolts. And I mean, even if you break a bolt, take it out, save that bolt.
Yeah.
Put it in that bag because, you know, it's good to know how many bolts are supposed to be in it, what type of bolts are supposed to be in it. I don't get rid of anything on a car. Like some people will, I'm not going to use these seats, I'm going to sell them, you know, or I'm not going to use this transmission or gas tank. Well, it can be because you don't know, you know, and you might need to mock that thing up again to see how it actually went back together. So I keep everything until that car is completely finished, and then I'll sell shit on Swap Meet or Facebook Marketplace or something like that, you know.
I like what you said about too is like when you like take apart the doors, they all go in one box. And I even go as far as I take pictures of it or label, and then like everything under the hood goes in one box, or the interior
or a bin, like go to Home Depot or Lowe's or something, buy those big ass plastic bins, and you can put a lot of stuff in there and label each one of them.
For a very little amount of money, you can save yourself a ton of time, a ton of lost parts.
Well, it takes time to do it. And I think that's, people want to get that thing apart. Yeah, let's get this car apart. Just throw all that shit in the corner, you know? The time that you spend putting everything and organizing everything as you take it apart, and you'll spend a lot more time doing it.
Yeah.
But it's probably going to save you double that amount of time in the long run because you know where everything's at now.
Absolutely. We've all been in the situation where we're looking for one bag or looking for one part that we threw to the side, or
right.
Or and the funny thing is they don't make that part anymore, or the knockoff one is junk.
Right.
Or
do I need to restore this part? Am I going to replace it, or do I need to find a better used part?
Or you have a $10 part that you can't find, and then they want $50 or $100 to overnight it, and you need that part because it's holding everything else. So
and you can restore it. Yeah, that day.
Yeah, I think the organizing and stuff is a part that a lot of do-it-yourselfers they overlook. And you're right, it is boring, but you have to be very methodical and very OCD, or you're not going to get this stuff done.
Yeah, and again, I'm telling you this because I learned it the hard way. Yeah. You know, I have.
So we got the car disassembled, and, you know, I think in most cases, not all, that going to bare metal is the best way. And we can debate and talk about it here in a minute, but there's obviously multiple ways to do it. And I'd love to talk about the pros and cons. The mechanical strip, meaning just getting DAs and grinders out, do you like that? What do you like and don't like about it?
It depends. You know, we talk about stripping a car. Yeah, that's probably the best thing to do. If you know that car, let's say, well, for example, I've got a couple cars that I've had for years, right? And I did the original work on them. And if I ever wanted to redo that car, would I strip it? Probably not, because I know what's underneath it. But if you buy a car and you don't know where it's been, and all you have to really do is check it to see how much material's on it. You know, a simple mill gauge. You know, the electronic mill gauges. I don't know, what are they, $700-800? You know,
it's funny you bring that up, because that was one of the things in my notes that I wanted to talk about. Is that, you know, a lot of people, especially the do-it-yourselfers or even collision guys, they don't have mill gauges.
No,
they don't know what they are.
They don't.
The mill gauges that we used to use, they were $1,000-1,200. The one that I had was 25 years old, and it would not work on ferrous and non-ferrous steel. Like if a magnet wouldn't stick to it, it wouldn't work. Now they have these ones, and maybe I can have David throw it up in the link somewhere, is they make some on Amazon that I'm sure that they're not very good, but they work well. I've had a couple, 2-3 years, less than $100.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
So for the guy that's just restoring a car and he's only going to do one car and that's going to be it, does he need to go out and spend $500 on a mill gauge? Probably not.
Yeah.
But for somebody that does this stuff, just for the fact that to start out, you can see how much material is on the car to begin with. Okay. And if you're over 10 mils, that's a lot.
What is a mil?
A mil is about the thickness of a piece of paper.
Okay. So it's a thousandth of an inch.
Yeah, basically.
And so,
I mean, I don't know.
So I always confuse mil with millimeters.
No, it's not a millimeter.
Yeah.
It's a different.
A mil is a thousandth.
It's MIL. It's a different type of measurement.
But so like the cool thing about a mill gauge, though, is you can walk up and go, wow, this is 40 or 50 or 60 or 100 mils. You probably know that
you're
there's
probably reading
body
body
work.
filler.
Yeah, there's mud there,
Yeah,
Bondo. Or
usually
whatever.
most mill gauges stop at around 40.
Yeah.
They'll go to 0 or whatever. You'll know there's a lot of material there.
What's most factory paint jobs on modern cars?
5, 6 total.
Okay.
That's with everything on them, So we used to say if you had one paint, the original factory paint job, and then you repainted it, you're probably going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10.
Okay.
You can get these custom jobs where we're putting a lot of clear, a lot of primer. You can easily exceed 30 sometimes.
How much
It's
is
crazy.
too much? Like if you're using good materials, and let's take the body filler out and stuff.
if you're using good materials, I try to keep everything as thin as I can.
Yeah.
Just for the
what
simple
starts
fact
scaring you?
that because if you have too much material, that increases the amount of time it takes for it to dry and cure. Okay, and then if you start piling material one on top of the other, and you're not giving an adequate amount of time, that's where you start to get things like shrinkage and blisters and peeling and cracking and all that nasty stuff that you don't want to see when you've spent 1,000 hours doing body and paint on something.
If it was done correctly,
Yeah.
and that's the big if, and it was the right materials, does 30 mils scare you?
Yeah.
Okay. So is it the 21 and under club is where you'd rather be
I
in?
try to stay under 15.
15, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's the other thing, too, about having a mill gauge. Then you can gauge how much you're actually putting on something,
Yes.
right? So I've got a car, and I bare metal, would put our epoxy primer on it. I can measure that epoxy primer. How much did I put on there? Okay,
Yeah.
2 mils is probably a good place to be on
Yeah.
epoxy primer. Then you're going to do your body work, and then it's hard to measure. It would be good to map the car and maybe find a spot where there's no filler.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. We
Because
do
there's
it.
going to be areas where there's no filler. Then you can get a true measurement, or map the car and you've got a specific spot that you're using even with the filler on it, and you know how much is on there, right? So you can go to that spot and see how much material you're putting on something. And you're always going to put more material, say, on a hood than you are on a fender that's sideways.
Yeah.
You always pile more on a top surface.
Yeah.
Measure both. You need to measure both. See how much do you need to put 12 mils of primer surfacer on your body work? Because if you do, then you need to do a little bit better body work.
Yeah.
That's way too much material.
The mapping with the mill gauge, I'll tell you what, I think it saves a lot of time and money. We use it even for clear coat.
Absolutely.
When you're wet sanding and wheeling,
Yeah.
so you don't punch through. And it's funny.
That's hard to gauge because edges are always different than
yeah.
flats.
Well, At least you kind of,
but you
not
have
going
a
into
pretty good
blind.
idea. Yes.
But like we were doing a reprime recently, and my deal is when I do a reprime, everything needs to be single digits. What does that mean? That mill gauge better not read over 9.9.
Yeah.
And so we're hitting some stuff, and it's like 15, 16 mils, and it's like, oh no.
That's not terrible.
Well, we're about ready to hit it with another 4 coats of primer.
Well, do you need
Yeah.
that?
With the crew that I have, the students and stuff, unfortunately.
I mean, if you're not sanding through to bare metal or body filler, keep sanding.
They have something called over sanding syndrome. It's very contagious. But so
that's how they make guide coat.
we'll come in and we'll make sure everything is 9.9, single digits or less before we come in and hit it again. And, we're start milling this car, and it's, 15, 16 some areas. Like,
Right.
let's block it again with 150, and then we'll 240 it before we hit it with the final line of primer.
Sure.
And it looked perfect to me, but, the mill gauge doesn't lie, so to speak. So I like that trick. So what's some of the things you like about, let's say, mechanical stripping, like the pros and cons? Because obviously we have media blasting and chem strip, which is very popular too.
If I've got a vehicle that doesn't have a ton of material on it and I want to strip it, say it's got an OEM paint job on it that's kind of chalked out and things like that, mechanical strip isn't a bad way to go.
Okay.
That's what I like. If it's got a ton of paint on it, mechanical strip's brutal. It's just too much material, and it'll cost you a fortune in sandpaper to get that. Plus, it's so labor intensive. I mean, sometimes that's all you can do.
Yeah.
but I would prefer in situations like that where there's an excessive amount of material on a vehicle, I'd rather have it blasted.
Yeah. The cool thing about the mechanical strip, and me personally, I don't think one's better than the other. I think they all have their advantages and disadvantages. And let's say if I was doing a car, maybe these parts I mechanical strip, these parts I chem strip, and I'm reaching here a little bit, but then these parts I have media blasted or whatever, depending on the car. But like with the mechanical stripping, sandpaper's $1 or $2 a sheet if you're buying decent stuff or more.
Well, and if you don't buy decent stuff, you'll burn through it in 10 seconds.
Yeah, exactly. And it's expensive, but like I think a lot of people get scared when they talk to the media blaster and they want $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 to blast a car.
You'll spend that much in sandpaper.
Yeah.
Plus your labor.
Yeah.
The other thing with mechanical stripping is it's great for the outside of the car, but what are you going to do about things like door jams or even you go around the wheel wells,
the backside, all the
quarter
hard
panel fenders, all the little areas where maybe a molding sets in. It's very hard to mechanical strip stuff like that. You still almost always have to go back in and blast it or use a
little spot blaster or something.
They use the little wheels, the strip wheels, and things. I mean, there's a lot of different things you can do, but all that's pretty labor intensive, and all that stuff's expensive.
Yeah, you're gonna catch me calling it sandblasting, but I mean it's technically media blasting because there's
a difference. There's a difference. Sandblasting, they're using silica sand, or they're using
walnuts, or they can use
that's media. There's that black oxide. They call
it
it black beauty. I mean, that's a lot of industrial stuff.
Yeah,
and that'll flat out, unless somebody really knows what they're doing as a blaster, they can destroy a car.
Absolutely. That black diamond that they sell at Tractor Supply for doing frames and stuff like that.
It's not bad.
Yeah,
if you get the fine stuff, it's not bad.
Yeah, so it's pretty aggressive.
Well, and that's the other thing too. Some of that stuff leaves a hell of a profile, and you'll have to either sand the hell out of it to get the profile out, or use some pretty heavy primer,
So if I mechanical strip something, I like to wax and grease it, then go to epoxy immediately, because there's one of your friends, Charlie Hutton, there's a famous video out there, and it says, at 50% relative humidity, steel starts rusting in 30 minutes.
It does.
And
that's in the restoration manual for PPG.
And I think that a lot of people, like if you're a do-it-yourselfer, you got this big old car, you send the entire car to the media blaster. Maybe it sat there for a day or half a day. Then they touch it with their bare hands, and then you bring it back. And then over a weekend, you're going to touch it again and then get it in epoxy or whatever your bare metal of choice is. I think that's a huge mistake. I think maybe you should have took it in smaller pieces, assuming you don't have a crew. But
no, sometimes I'll just take a few panels, and when I go to pick them up, I'll take a few more panels.
I love that.
And I bring them back, and I get them immediately in epoxy.
And you don't get hit with that. For the people who go, I can't afford that $4,000 right off the bat. Well, then it's a couple hundred.
Yeah.
So it's the same amount of money or more.
Some blasters offer to put the epoxy on right after they're blasted. I know of S&S that I think they'll powder coat if you want it, like a powder coat.
Yeah.
Primer type thing. I've never done that. I don't know anything about it, but it seems to make sense.
Yeah.
Because it coats it.
Yeah.
And powder coat's basically just paint that they melt on.
I think here's one thing that people really mess up too is that we were talking about cleaners, is that if I mechanically strip something, let's say I'm going to prime over like a 150 or 240, I like to blow it off, wax and grease it, and then go to my bare metal primers. If it comes out of, let's say, a blasting cabinet, or I pick up a door from the media blaster, should I wax and grease it before I do my epoxy primer fresh out of the sandblaster?
I wouldn't. Because normally when they blast something, and media blast, depending on the media, like if it's plastic bead or walnut shells, that leaves a very smooth finish. So I probably wouldn't feel bad about putting a cleaner on that. Okay. Probably not a water cleaner, probably a solvent cleaner, depending on how long it sits.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you could just blow it off really good and wipe it with a clean, dry towel of some sort, microfiber or something like that, and go right to epoxy without introducing a chemical into it. Anytime you put chemicals on something, you're taking a chance that something could go wacky on you.
Okay.
If something's sandblasted, now you've got a profile, and that profile can tend to hold things in longer than you think and you want it to. And if you prime over that, whatever it is you put on there, now you're basically putting a contamination on it that's going to cause you some problems later on.
Okay.
So you got to be careful of that stuff.
So basically, if something comes from the sandblaster, it might be best just to blow it and go right, blow it off with some compressed air. And
biggest thing is get something on it as soon as you possibly can, because it's true, depending on where you live. Okay, here we are in Michigan.
Yeah.
The humidity's brutal here, especially this time of year.
Yeah.
If something sits in bare metal for a day, I guarantee it started to rust.
Yeah.
And you don't see it.
Yeah.
Now, if you're in Arizona or you're in New Mexico, out west, somewhere like that, stuff can sit around for days and you don't have to worry about it. And then those are a lot of the guys, I don't use any type of metal prep. I just clean it off and paint. And I've never had a problem. Well, you probably won't.
Yeah.
But around here, some of the stuff I've seen when I dig into it, it's terrible.
It's funny, if you go off of the PPGP sheets for DPLF, their epoxy primer, and I know you're going to turn us on to a different epoxy primer today, but DPLF is still probably the most popular out there.
That everybody just needs to quit using DPLF.
Yeah, we'll save that for our primer one. But if you look at the DPLFP sheet, it says something to the effect that if you're priming over aluminum, do it within 8 hours. If you're doing it over raw steel, prime it immediately.
Within 30 minutes.
And basically that's what they're telling you is, look, it's rusting, So, and it's funny as people go, well, how do you know all this stuff? It's in the tech sheet. It's like two lines, and it's bold and underlined.
And the reason it's in a tech sheet is because somebody did it in a lab and researched it and seen how long it took for something like that to happen.
Yeah. I love media blasting, but you kind of said this already. If you got somebody who's good, if the person can blast good, then they can do a great job.
It's the media blasting, walnut shells, plastic, things like that. It's pretty easy on the metal, because it doesn't create the heat that the sand does, and sand will create heat on a panel, and you get a hood or a roof or something like that, and it's going to warp the hell out of it because of the heat. The heat causes the warpage. If they don't know what they're doing. I'm not going to say that you can't sandblast the roof of a car, because there are sandblasters that are very good at what they do, and they can do it. And I've seen it done.
Yeah.
Personally, me with a blaster, I'm dangerous. I'm not going to do it. So that's kind of where I'm at. And there's some industrial blasters out there. You take them a car body, you're going to be in deep shit when you get it back.
Absolutely.
Because it's going to be a mess.
So the last one, that's probably the three that are most popular, is, well, obviously you can do nothing, or if you decide to strip it, you can go mechanical, you can blast it, and then the chemical strip. What's your thoughts on chem dipping it and having it E-coated and all that stuff? What's the good and bad?
The good is that it gets it really clean, cleans the metal. Usually there's some sort of coating on it to keep it from rusting. The bad is it depends on where you're taking it. Okay, because a lot of these dippers, the chemicals that they use, I believe in a lot of cases the EPA is trying to outlaw most of that stuff, because it could be methylene chloride. They may be using something different now. I'm not an expert on it, but I know that the stuff's expensive, right? And how many parts, how many vehicles do they run through their chemical bath before they change and put fresh chemicals in again? And that's the biggest problem, is that chemical will get into all the seams and the pinch welds, and if it's old, then it's very hard to get that stuff out of there. Okay, and that's the other thing, is how well do they clean that stuff after they've dipped it? You need a good reputable dipper. And again, industrial type places that just do industrial work, it's not that big a deal. They don't care.
Yeah, I
wouldn't be taking my $1 million muscle car there, my Hemi Cuda. I wouldn't be having them dip it, because if they don't clean that stuff properly, it's going to come out later, and it's going to start bubbling around the pinch welds and the seams, and and things like
every
that.
car that we've had dip
Yeah.
has had some
Seepage.
yes, and it rusts out and sweats out, and we power wash it and sandblast it out, and we know it going into it, and we do have them e-coated, and we go to somebody who,
Yeah, but the e-coat still doesn't help that.
yeah, and we're going to a guy who is one of the best around, and it's still happening. So I mean, I guess my point is that, you know, it sucks no matter which way you do it. You got to kind of
there's no perfect way.
Yes,
you know, you got to kind
absolutely.
of pick and choose your bit. Like personally, I prefer media blast.
Me too.
But there's a big disadvantage to that too. You're going to be cleaning that shit out of the car for a
Forever.
year. You know,
rolling it, vacuuming
Oh,
it,
my
blowing
God.
it, rolling
I mean,
it,
I'm
vacuuming
working
it.
on a Mustang where I actually cut the rockers open and got that shit out, and I'm still getting
Yeah.
stuff out. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
So that's the disadvantage to media blasting is it's messy. It's a mess. It really is. Chemical dipping. I have done chemical dipping. I'm real particular about what I do it on. If it's say like a valance panel or something flat that doesn't have a lot of pinch welds, fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. A hood? No way. Because what they do with the chemical dip is they take all the
Support
out of it, and now it's flopping around, and
You got
it's
to be careful
hard
to use the
replace
right
it.
stuff.
Well,
to
you
replace it.
almost have to separate the two pieces. You know, the frame and the outer skin of the hood, which who the hell? I mean, I don't want to do that, but that's what you almost have to do and replace the flutter material.
That's the way they did it in factory.
That's the way they did it
didn't
at the
just
factory.
squeeze urethane.
No.
Oh, I just squeezed some window urethane. I mean, it works. But
but you'll get a dip.
Yeah,
You'll always
see
get a
it.
dip. You'll never get that hood straight. It'll never be
ask
right.
me how I know.
Me too.
Yeah, I've tried to do that, like little 8115, little, you know.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
It sucks it right back down.
Especially like being an owner of a lot of black cars.
Yeah,
like that's
you see
very
it.
humbling, you know, to do it.
Yeah.
So you get the car in bare metal. You know, I guess we'll talk about etch versus epoxy, but before we get into that, I want to know your opinions on some of these phosphate coatings, this metal cleaner and conditioners. I know some guys are for them, or some guys are against them. What's your take on using a metal protector?
I am a huge promoter of a phosphate metal prep.
Okay.
And I know there's people out there that aren't, because if it isn't done properly, it's going to burn you.
Yeah.
Okay. So
But that's like every product.
yeah,
right?
it's got to be done properly. Again, I'm going to go back to one I'm familiar with is PPG.
Yeah.
right?
What part numbers?
And there's other ones out there, you know, there's OSFO and there's a whole bunch of other stuff out there that people use and have good luck with. I can't speak for that because I don't know it. You know, I've never used it. I use for metal, for steel, I use SX 579 as the cleaner. Okay. And you mix that with water.
1-to-1?
No, you mix it 2 parts
it's 2 to 1?
water, 2
Okay.
parts water, 1 part cleaner.
Okay.
And I spray it on with just a sprayer,
Okay.
a pump sprayer. And then I usually work it in good with, like, say, a red Scotch-Brite pad.
Okay.
And I use that normally on the outside of the panels. Okay. Inside of the panels, when you get into, say, underhoods, doors, jams, things like that, normally what I'll do is I'll prime those first. I'll prime them with epoxy or something like that, because then the metal prep that you use doesn't affect any of that stuff.
Okay.
Okay. And if those parts have already been blasted and everything, so now they're done, they're protected. It's usually the outside, because the outside panel is the one that's the easiest to do it properly, because it's a flat panel. So I spray it down with the cleaner, and that's the other thing is I only do one panel at a time. Don't do too big of an area at once. I spray it down with that. I go over it real good with a red pad. If there's any slight rust on it, say you've had something blast, and that's the other thing. If it's a blasted part, you have to be careful with that, because the phosphate will grow at a certain rate. And if it's blasted, the profile will cause it to grow too much, which can actually hurt the adhesion. So that's why a lot of people don't like doing metal prep.
So if I have a blasted part, can I just take, like, let's say a DA with 80 or 150 and
you
run
sand
over
it.
it?
Yeah,
and
you got
then
to smooth out the
Okay.
profile. Now and that's for something if it's been blasted.
Yeah.
And you get primer on it immediately, you don't have to do anything with metal prep.
Yeah.
If you're going to mechanically strip something, or if it's something that you know has been sitting around for a while, like you could have something in bare metal in your shop for a month and you're doing metal work on it, you're welding on it, doing things like that, and it sits in bare metal, I guarantee you need to metal prep that thing.
Yeah.
So now you do the metal prep process, you spray the metal prep on there, and you hit it with the red Scotch-Brite pad after you sanded it with, say, 80 or 150, something like that. Then the part that scares the shit out of everybody is you got to rinse it with water because that's what neutralizes it. And they're going, damn, I'm putting
water on
my
bare metal.
You're not putting water on bare metal. That panel, once you spray that 579 on there, now has a phosphate coating on it. It's a coated panel. It is not bare metal. Now you rinse that, and you can dry it, and I prefer to rinse it with warmer water, because what I see is if you rinse it with cold water, which actually the P-sheet will tell you cold water, it's wrong.
Yeah.
If you rinse it with warmer water, then you'll get a kind of a bluish gray look to it once it dries. Whereas if you rinse it with cold water, the phosphate will actually turn brown.
Looks like rust.
Which looks like rust and scares the shit out of everybody.
Yeah.
That's not a good way to do it. There's a second step to it, though, and that is the SX520, which is a zinc phosphate.
Okay.
That's what's giving you the corrosion protection.
And that's straight out of the bottle?
That's, yes, straight out of the bottle.
Different
it's
red
green.
Scotch-Brite?
Well, be careful with the Scotch-Brite because you don't want to rub on it too much.
Okay.
Because you'll remove the phosphate.
Take up the first step.
So I just spray that real good with the 520, and if I use a Scotch-Brite, I just kind of go over it lightly just to move it around.
I love the P-sheet. It actually, because they have the part numbers, and I would never be able to do the part numbers off the top of my head, which is crazy that how many part numbers you got in your head. But they make aluminum cleaner, aluminum prep.
Yeah.
Like, let's say if you had a set of billet aluminum rims and you wanted to paint them.
Yeah.
They have a cleaner and a prep for those two.
533 and 501.
In the same P-sheet.
Yes.
And the great thing is, if you bring up the P-sheet, again, we're not pushing PPG. We're just familiar with PPG. If you go to ppgrefinish.com, you can go under their products. You can look at SX line, and you can find their metal conditioners. And what I like about it, it says step 1, do the 2-to-1 mix, because I thought it was 1-to-1.
Yeah.
Use the Scotch-Brite, step 2, and then rinse it with water. And it's an idiot could do it.
Yeah.
How do I know? Because I do it.
Yeah.
And I'm an idiot.
Once you hit it with the zinc phosphate, now you rinse that and dry it.
But
I dry.
Have like 8 hours before you got to go to epoxy or something. So
it's giving you time.
Yeah,
it's giving you time. Yeah, I would probably try to get something on it within
that day.
Yeah, I try to do it that day. You can wait overnight. It's not going to kill it because now it's got a coating on it, right? So it's protected.
And am I crazy? I don't like drying it with a paper towel like this. I pat it. Am I nuts for doing that?
No, I usually use compressed air.
Oh, you use compressed air
to dry it. Yeah.
Right, little compressed air and pat. Am I overthinking this?
Yeah, I'll just use it.
You can go like this. You're not going to mess up the crystals or anything?
No, you're not.
Okay.
It'll sometimes get a weird look to it. You know, it'll look strange, but if it's done properly and you get all that, it creates a sludge.
Yeah.
You'll see the sludge coming off of it. You got to get all that off of there.
What I like about that is a lot of people are going to go, you don't need to do that because you're doing the epoxy and then you're putting different primers and clears and all this expensive stuff. But what people don't understand is if you drive your car and let's say you get a stone chip, it's going to remove your expensive epoxy and all your expensive clear and your expensive candy or whatever you got. And it's going to expose that raw metal and it's going to rust and it's going to grow and it's going to just get bigger and bigger. I like that actual metal conditioner because it will get chalky and you can see it get nasty, but it protects it and it doesn't get real bad right away.
I would tell you, hey, don't take my word for it.
Yeah.
Do a test, okay? Because this is what I did, and this is what made me a believer in this stuff. It's not so much it is. It's a lot of it is it prevents rust, corrosion, things like that. It's the adhesion. The adhesion that you get when you do that process is absolutely unbelievable. And a way to tell is just take a piece of sheet metal, an old piece of sheet metal, strip it down to bare metal. Okay? Tape half of it off. Metal prep one side, don't metal prep the other side. Put whatever primer you're going to put on there. Epoxy, normally it's going to be epoxy. I tell you to put some sort of epoxy on there and let it sit for a week. Okay? Now do an adhesion test. Best way to do an adhesion test, I mean, they have tools for doing adhesion tests, but if you want to, take a razor blade and just make like 1/4-inch slices in it and do a crosshatch. Okay, go one way, then go the other way. Then take tape, like take duct tape, Gorilla Tape, something that has a lot of adhesion to it. Put it over that area and let it sit there for a minute and then just rip it off. And what happens? Okay, I guarantee you the side that you metal prepped, if you did it properly, will not move. The other side, it may not move either because epoxy is pretty tough. But I've had a little bit of it come off, okay? Here's another way. If you can get a piece of steel that's new, that hasn't been sanded, just clean it off good. Like you get a piece of sheet metal and it's fresh and there's no sanding done to it. It's just clean. Just take it and clean it with wax and grease remover. Metal prep one side, don't metal prep the other. Try that test. I guarantee you that epoxy will fly off of that area that you didn't sand.
Well,
and the area that you didn't sand and metal prepped, it won't budge. I've seen it. I've done it. That's what made me a believer.
Absolutely.
In that process was, holy crap, this stuff sticks
and this
like
is
crazy.
not new. They've been doing this for a long time. It's proven.
The thing is, it's very similar to what the factory does when they run a car through a phosphate bath. They run bare bodies through the phosphate bath prior to putting any E-coat or anything on them. You're duplicating that process. The stuff's not new, Gary. The stuff that
it's not super expensive either.
Been around since the early 50s.
Yeah.
Okay, that was the right way to do it back then.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have etch primers and epoxy primers and things like that.
People are going to get so butthurt over this.
I'm
telling
sorry,
you.
guys.
And the thing is, you don't have to do it. I mean, I know you're right. I've tried it too. I've tried it both ways because I was not a metal prep guy forever. I'm a get it sanded down, get it in an epoxy type of guy. There ain't nothing better than epoxy. And I was like that for many, many years. And now we metal prep everything. And I'm never going back.
We'll get the hate. I've done it like this for 40 years and never had an issue.
I got T-shirts older than those guys.
That's fine. That's fine. If that's how you want to do it. I'm not saying you have to do it this way, but this is what works.
So we got our product in the booth or in the garage or whatever. We've did the metal prep, not did the metal prep. We have not put any body fillers on. We've removed all of our rust. Why an epoxy? Before we talk about what epoxy, because I know that's going to shock a lot of people, why not just etch it? Why not get some rattle can etch? What is it about epoxy that it's superior for collision and restoration?
Well, the reason we have etch is more for collision because it's speed. Okay. And if you do the metal prep process, you absolutely do not want to do etch. Because those are two acids and they'll fight each other. Okay. And you're going to have a problem if you put an etch primer over the top of something you've metal prepped. In fact, I'd say you'd be better off just putting primer surfacer over the top of the.
And if we're putting Bondo on our bare metal, if it's etch,
etch and polyester don't get along either.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna etch prime something, you put polyester. That's going to be polyester primer or body filler. They're both polyesters. They're not going to get along.
So it's safe to say in restoration and collision, I mean, just so we don't go into an hour of it, etch is dead. It's outdated.
Well, it's not. It's not. No.
For collision and restoration?
Etch was created to replace that whole metal prep process that I just talked about.
Okay.
In the collision world, not in the restoration world, in the collision world.
All right.
Because any car built, I think, after, say, 1990, I think was all done with galvanized steel. And if I just take a primer surfacer, like say urethane primer surfacer, and I sand something down to bare metal, the galvanized in that steel, unless you take all the galvanized off, now you got bare metal, the galvanized is constantly trying to push everything off. Okay, that's what its job is. So, used to be where you get a car from the 60s and you got a stone chip in it, what happened? It started to rust, right? Yeah. You get that little bit of brown. Today, if a car gets a stone chip in it, does it rust?
Yeah, it chalks a lot.
It chalks. Well, that's the galvanized giving itself up. Okay. The problem is if I don't put either an epoxy or an etch down on that galvanized steel, and I don't know about reproduction parts. I don't know if they're using galvanized steel on them or not.
Yeah, you never know.
Have to do some research there. But if I just put a regular urethane primer surfacer on galvanized steel, is it going to stick It will to a point because you sanded it and it's got some mechanical adhesion. The problem is it's going to be real easy if something hits it in that spot. It's going to be real easy for it to chip off.
Yeah.
Because the galvanized is trying to push it off, right? And if it does chip off, now that chalky, if you want the technical term, it's called saponification.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. Sounds dirty, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a sacrificial coating. Is that what they say?
Yeah, it is a sacrificial coating. That's exactly what it is. You did listen.
Yeah.
So anyway, that will start to creep underneath that urethane primer, and you're going to have some delamination issues. That's an etch primer has an acid in it, and it will bite into that galvanized, preventing all that from happening. Same with an epoxy. Epoxy will do the same thing. The difference between epoxy and etch, epoxies are fast. I can go over them in 10, 15 minutes with a urethane or whatever I need to go over them with.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's it. Etch is fast. I'm sorry. So the etch is faster.
Yep.
So that's why it's used more in production work, because we're always kind of in a hurry on that. Whereas epoxy takes a lot longer to cure. And usually we're talking minimum of an hour, preferably overnight.
So I know you're going to throw me a curveball, but I'll set it up, and then you can shock all the PPG guys out there, which is fine. Because everyone says, hey, I use DP. You don't use DP because DP's been gone for a long time. You probably use DPLF. You could be using DPLV, but I'm going to guess that you're not using DP. I mean, when did that go away? 1990-ish?
1990-ish.
You know?
Yeah.
So you're not using DP. You're using DPLF with the 401 or 402 hardener. I have forever, and Jeff's going to change this whole world, I like the one catalyst has no induction time. The other catalyst, you have to wait 30 minutes induction time.
401, 402.
Yep, 401 and 402. What I like about, I always use the one with an induction time because it's got a 72-hour pot life versus an 8-hour. And I like that. But also that hardener with the 30-minute induction time was designed to bite into unsanded E-coat. So in my mind, it's better for adhesion.
It is the better process if you're going to use that.
Yeah.
But so let's take a look at DP.
Yeah. Here we go.
The original DP, when did that come out?
1980 or before?
Oh, well before that. It came out in the 70s.
Okay.
Right? Probably the early 70s sometime.
Hell, I wasn't even out in the early 70s.
Well, it was originally intended for fleet use, industrial use, to where you could have something sandblasted or something stripped down to bare metal. You could spray that epoxy on that panel, whatever it was, and you could let it sit for whatever the amount of time was. Usually it was an hour, and I could put a top coat on top of it and be done with it. At that time, let's go to the mid-70s, early 80s. What were we using for paint systems back then? It was
lacquer, baby. Maybe some enamel.
Lacquer.
Maybe some enamel.
Almost everything was lacquer based.
Centauri. Shout out to DuPont.
Yeah. So your undercoats were lacquered. We were just barely starting to get into Cadillac, and the European companies were a little ahead of us at that time. They were running some catalyzed primer, and I remember going, you mean I got to clean the gun out every time I prime something? What are you talking about?
I'll just thin it with thinner.
I got my DZ3 here, my lacquer primer, and I just leave it in there all day long, you know? So it was a big adjustment for American painters at that time. Well, at that time, the only sealers that we had were the lacquer sealers. Del Seal and, 1980 Del Seal, things like that. So the epoxy was actually a step up from that because it was catalyzed.
Yeah.
Plus, if you used 401, you had, what was it, a 72-hour pot life? Hell, I could sit in the gun for 3 days.
That was a breakthrough.
And it was available in colors. Wow, we could get black and we could get gray and red. And wow, this is great. I could match it because paint didn't really cover that great back then, We didn't have the pigments that we have today where, you put something over gray and it would take 5-6 coats. But if I had black and I had a dark blue, wow, I could get it to cover pretty fast, So the epoxy had advantages. Now, keep in mind that technology is from the early 70s.
50 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's 50 years old. So around about the early 90s, that's when they started to hit with the EPA started to hit with the VOC laws. And the old DP did not match that. You couldn't hit the VOC number that they wanted to hit for the EPA. So they had to change it. And that's when they came out with DPLF. And everybody thinks DPLF means lead-free. Guess what, guys? It never had lead in it.
Deltron primer.
DP never had lead in it. Well,
that's what everybody knows.
What they had to do was what they took out of it was a chromate.
Okay.
Which is bad to begin with
They
because
did that with the etch too.
because
though.
chromate is good for corrosion protection.
Yeah.
But they took the chromate out of it, but they couldn't call it CF because some other company had copyrighted CF or something. So
Yeah.
it was a copyright issue is why it ended up being called LF.
Thanks, California, for the chromate, by the way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
With that, then they eliminated the chromate out of it, which kind of hurt it a little bit. But the issue that I have with DPLF
Yeah.
is that it is very old technology. Basically, the resins and everything were the same.
Boo hiss. Boo hiss.
It never fully cures, guys. Think about it. If you just read the sheet, and it tells you how long do you have to wait.
You wait 72 hours, it's still liquid.
Well, you have a week.
That's 3 days.
And you don't have to sand it for a week. Well, what does that tell you? That tells
Yeah.
you that product's staying open for a week. I guarantee you, if you spray DPLF on something, and even you let it sit for a month. Go ahead, let it sit for a month. Now take a thinner rag and hit it with a thinner rag. What happens to it?
Something's going to come off. It's still soft.
Probably going to come off.
That's why I know a lot of people in restoration, guys. Again, we're not picking on you. The only failures I've had in the last, let's say, 2 decades from using a high-end system is by misusing epoxy twice. And is pounding it on, like just pounding it on,
Right.
way too many mils, like putting it on like a high-fill primer, or painting it or priming it and then putting like a top coat on it in an hour or 2 hours. Because the piece sheet, I think, says 15 minutes. And it's like,
That's way too fast.
That's crazy.
That's way too fast.
We're waiting days. And really,
If
if
you
you could, I'd like to wait a month.
Well, if you can hit the exact number of millage, which I believe with
0.9.
well,
is
I
what
think
they recommend.
maybe 1.7.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's
Yeah.
if it's 2 coats. The thing is, if you don't put it on thick enough, it isn't doing anything for
Yeah.
you. Okay, and if you put it on too thick, now it takes that much longer for it to dry. And if you put body filler over the top of it, which it says you can do, right? And if you put body filler over the top of it or polyester primer over the top of it, which cures very quickly,
Yeah.
you've got a goo sandwich underneath that thing, right?
Absolutely.
It's soft, and that's going to be the first thing that gives out. When you get into hot weather and things like that it's still soft under there.
So what's this new Delfleet epoxy you like? What's the part number on
You
it?
can use, there's DPLV, which is okay. It's not as good as the Delfleet.
Okay.
And that's available in 3 colors. It works a whole lot better with metal prep than it does by itself.
Okay. On your personal vehicle,
I use Delfleet,
Delfleet.
which is a PPG fleet product.
Okay.
The number on it is F as in Frank 4921.
Okay.
And it has a 4922 catalyst. Okay. And it's available in black, white, and gray. And if it's just 4921, it's gray. If it's 4921W, it's white. 4921BK is black.
Isn't it a little thinner than the
It's
old?
very thin.
Okay.
So
It is.
It's
tip
a thin
size?
build epoxy.
What tip size are you
It's a
using?
little tricky. I know that some guys are going to go, I tried that shit. It runs like
Yeah.
crazy. Guys, there's only one reason you get a
1/8.
run. There's only one reason you get a run in paint. I don't care if it's primer, clear, color. One reason. You put too freaking much on. Okay. Or you use too slow a solvent. That could be part of it too. I will normally spray that, and I'm telling you, on the 4921, when I first started using it, I ran the living shit out of it.
Yeah.
Because it's slow, and it tends to run easy if you're not careful with it. So I will normally put a very light first coat on, especially because I love the black. The reason I like the black because it looks just like factory E-coat and has a beautiful sheen to it when you lay it down. And if you can see any imperfections or anything like that. So I tend to use more of the black than anything. The problem with the black is the pigment's not real strong, so it can be a little transparent, which makes you want to over apply it.
And then you run it.
And then you run the shit out of it. So I normally spray it out of a gun with a 1.3 or 1.4.
Okay.
I
use a top coat gun. You're not using
I use
a primer gun?
No, I don't use a primer gun. I use a top coat gun. I will use a fairly fast reducer in it, depending on the conditions. I will usually go a step faster than I normally would on anything else. So if it's 75 degrees, I'll use something set up for 65, 70 degrees.
Okay.
Like 870, something like that. And the reason for that is because the epoxy itself, the resin, is very slow. So you can get away with a little faster reducer. And that and I'll put a very light first coat on. I'll give it at least a 10-minute flash time, let it sit. And then I put a second coat on. And you can go a little wetter on the second coat to get your coverage. And that will normally give you about 1.5 mils, 2 mils of material to work with. Perfect. In that.
Because obviously you're giving it a little, I don't want to say scuff, but not really a sand before you come in and do your body work over top of it. And you're probably removing a little bit of material.
Yeah, you'll sand it a little bit before body.
So you're letting it dry, hopefully days or a month.
As long as I can. Yeah, I have gone on top of it overnight.
That's the cool thing about the restoration guys is why not just take the 2 doors, get them in primer, then go to the deck lid hood, get those in primer, then these parts, get those in primer. And then if you're doing smaller batches, we were talking about mapping. I write down when I prime stuff, what day, like it's
Keep
been
a
this
record.
long.
It's not that hard.
I mean, you can use a whiteboard. I put it in my phone. And
you'll be glad you did down the road.
Because I know that the epoxy needs to be dried. I'm so OCD. I want it to be cured.
Sure.
I want it to be. I'm not saying I always do that, but I want it to be. What are you sanding or scuffing it with? What grit dry before you put your body filler on?
I would say anywhere between 100 grit and say 180.
Okay, so that 100, 120, 150, 180, whatever you want.
Will filler stick to that unsanded? Yeah, in a certain amount of time, it absolutely will. I'm going to sand it regardless, just because I feel better putting a little bit of a
But you don't want to over sand it and remove all that epoxy.
No, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm probably going to red pad it.
Okay.
Because that way I can get into all the little nooks and crannies and not worry about taking material off.
Red pad.
Uh-huh.
I had Marc Cartier here.
Well, you can use that.
I know, a little 120, 180.
You're not going to get into little nooks and crannies with this, though.
I
a red pad, you will.
Marc Cartier.
Yeah. Those are fine. Those are fine.
DeVilvis now, Norton.
I'll red pad it first, and then I'll hit it with some sandpaper, and I don't go real heavy on the sandpaper.
You probably more of the 150, 180 guy.
Yeah, okay. I like a little finer because filler's still going to stick to it.
And then obviously you're blowing it off.
Maybe clean it with some degreaser, and
then what kind of mud, what kind of Bondo, what kind of dough are you using? I know you're not totally product loyal, but like, are you an Evercoat guy, 3M guy? What are you using?
I typically have been using Evercoat.
Okay.
I've been using the Rage Ultra.
All right.
I like that because it spreads real nice and it sands fairly
easy. You buy it on Amazon or getting it at a local jobber?
Go to a jobber and get it. There's actually 2 different kinds because a lot of times when we're doing these restoration jobs, we're doing a really big area. And I don't know about anybody else, but it's kind of hard to spread a whole half a hood or a deck lid or something like that on
especially
some of these cars.
Summertime.
Yeah. So they make Rage Ultra Extra, which gives you way more time. By itself, I think it's too slow, and it tends to want to gum the paper up a little bit, but I mix the 2 together.
Okay.
And, man, I can usually get a good half hour of work time if I mix the 2 together.
I use Evercoat as well, and again, no disrespect to 3M or there's 100 good body filler brands out there. One of the things I like about Evercoat, and you kind of tipped me off to this, is that if you look at Evercoat and it says Metalworks on it, that basically means that you can mix any of those products, the Metalworks. Like if you're using, let's say, Rage, and it's too thick, and then the glaze I use is the 416 metal glaze.
You can put the glaze in it.
And that's too thin. you can actually mix those 50, 50, 80, 20, 70, 30, 30, whatever, to get whatever consistency you want. And then obviously the thinner glaze spreads easier, sands easier, but sets up quicker.
Well, and that's kind of why I like the Rage.
Yeah.
Because it spreads like a glaze.
Yeah.
You know, and then we'll get hate on this, you know, that they use the honey.
The honey.
All it is fiberglass resin.
Yeah.
And don't ever put that in your filler.
No.
It causes issues.
No.
But everybody's gonna hate me for that, or half of
that was the old school trick in the 70s and 80s before we had metal glaze, so they had to do it, you know, but whatever. And ironically, a lot of the companies, they jumped on the bandwagon and they even make it now.
Yeah.
Whatever. So obviously you get your body filler, your mud done. What grit are you finishing it with? I'm not saying what grit do you start with. Are you priming over a 150 or finer with your mud?
Usually 150 or finer. And there's fillers, a whole nother deal. Most of the fillers today, I mean, it used to be they'd start with 40 grit. You don't need to do that. That's crazy. Yeah, that was the old.
That's me.
Black
on
magic
aluminum.
Or
on
whatever.
aluminum.
Yeah. Don't need that anymore. I mean, maybe a couple swipes to get things going if you got a big area, but normally 80 grit will sand it real quick.
Yeah.
You know, the newer stuff. And the stuff I use, it does. It sands it real fast.
Don't be afraid too, is once you get your body work done with 80 and like you run your hand over it and you go, wow, that's perfect, I could prime that, is using some guide coat to guide coat that, and then coming in and hard blocking it with the 150 to make sure you get all those deep scratches out before you prime it.
Well, you got to get it level, and you need a coarser grit to get it level. If you start sanding too fine, you're going right over the top of it. You're not getting it level. So you have to use a little coarser grit to get it going, get it flat. Couple rules of thumb. Okay, so we have an epoxy down, and again, I do like to use the black epoxy. The other thing I'll tell you too on this epoxy that we didn't cover was that in the testing, because there's a lot of testing done on these products. Okay, and that's what the higher end paint companies will do, not just PPG, but the higher end paint companies will do extensive testing prior to putting that out. And I know for a fact the 4921 holds up even better than E-coat when they do a salt spray test.
Wow.
A salt spray test is where they paint the panels, they'll scratch them, and they put them in a saltwater tank, and they see how long it takes for that rust to creep. 4921 with metal prep holds up better than E-coat.
I think it's cheaper than DPLF too.
It's a lot cheaper.
And it's better?
Yeah.
And it's,
it
is. It goes farther. So why are we using DPLF?
I don't know.
I'm still using DPLF. Just because I'm on my last two cars.
Well, and it's better than DPLV too.
Yeah.
But LV's not bad, but it's not as good as 4921.
Now PPG's going to hear this, and they're going to double the price, and now we're screwed.
Sorry.
But
then
don't buy the Del Fleet epoxy. Stick with it.
So for the body filler, then once I start sanding on it, and since I used a dark epoxy, when that body filler starts to get thin and I hit a high spot, now I can see that black spot.
Yeah.
You know what you should do right there? Stop sanding. Because that's the other question is, okay, I put epoxy down. If I bust through the bare metal, do I need to re-epoxy it? Do you?
I think that you do. And you and Charlie.
And then how long do you wait?
No, exactly. And that's you and Charlie turned me on to something where I'm waiting days. Like, let's say my mud's done. I used to, let's say all my mud's done and I'm ready for first high build prime. Like, I don't count my epoxy as my first prime. That's like I sealed it up. It's not sealer, but I sealed it. What I'm doing is I'm doing my mud, and then I would spot all my areas with epoxy. I'd wait a couple days, and then I would hit it with a high fill.
If you want to do that,
that's the way I used to.
You could do that last thing at night. Hit your epoxy spots. Wait till the next day, and then come in and do what you're going to do. If I'm on a large flat area and I see that dark spot, I stop and I check it. And if it needs more filler, I'm going to put more filler on that. You might put another layer of filler on it. Pretty rare you can get everything in one coat of filler, right?
Yeah.
If I bust through an edge, because it's real easy to bust through edges, am I going to worry about epoxying that before I put filler down? Probably not, because I'm probably going to bust through it again.
Yeah.
Okay, so you got to kind of be selective on where you do
Yeah.
that. The biggest thing is stop sanding before you've got a big old bare metal spot. You can see it, especially if you put epoxy down first. Even if it's just, if you are the guy that wants to put it over bare metal still, that's fine too. But you're going to see it. Stop and put more filler on. Continue on. Okay, so then if you bust through after all the body work's done, then you can address it with an epoxy one more time before you put anything else on it.
So we did our epoxy, we took care of the bare metal, we got our body work done, and it's in a 150. We re-epoxied just a couple little spots here or there. We waited a day.
Depends on what you're going to use for primer.
So yeah, here's the big one, because there's a couple different ways. Is it safe to say that we can rule out urethane as our high build primer?
Absolutely.
Okay, because that's the high build primer choice in collision. It's urethane.
It
urethane,
is.
urethane.
Again, it's collision, right?
Yep.
The problem with urethanes is that they're gonna shrink,
Like bad.
depending on how depending on how heavy you put them on.
Yeah, most of them is like what, 50% or more.
They're really designed to be put on in a 2 or 3 coat application. If you're putting 5, 6, 7 coats of urethane primer on something, you're going to get some ugly shrinkage.
I'm not crapping on urethane, because urethane's awesome. It sands awesome.
Yes.
This, that, and other. But there's probably 2 camps out there. There's the poly guys, and then there's the new VP 2050 guys.
High build epoxy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason I don't use that initially, instead of the 4921, is because you don't need that high build. Okay, you don't need it. Not on something that you're going to put body filler on. So I like to use a thinner build like the 4921 first.
So I think a lot of people get confused where it's like, wait a minute, he's saying to use this Delfleet or this DPLF, that's epoxy. But then now he's saying use the VP 2050, that's epoxy.
That's a high build.
I can just cut out the bare metal because this VP 2050 is epoxy. Are you still recommending using the Delfleet as a bare metal?
As a bare metal.
And then this is a high fill.
Not saying you can't use the 2050, because you could actually.
Because it is DTM.
Yeah.
But if we're talking the best, what are you going to do on your car?
4921, filler, bodywork, and then, so there's 2 ways you can go. You can either go a high build epoxy or you can go polyester primer.
And I go back and forth.
Both are great products. Okay. The thing with polyester primer is if I've got couple bare metal spots showing through, I'm going to epoxy that first.
Yeah.
The nice thing about the 2050 epoxy is it's an epoxy. I don't have to epoxy it first. It is an epoxy.
Like what I love about it, I don't use currently a PPG product. So again, just to prove that we didn't get bought and paid for by PPG, I'm using Evercoat Slick Sand.
Okay.
And that's the poster child. What's
that's fine.
The poly Omni that PPG uses?
Yeah, it's MP2.
We'll pop it up on the screen.
Yeah,
if you want to keep it all PPG, assuming you want to. Because like if you're a BASF
they do have
guy,
they do have a really good polyester.
Might as well keep it all the same. Here's the one place that I get off the PPG bandwagon is I'm a big Slick Sand guy. The bad thing, there's a lot of bad things about Slick Sand. There's a lot of good things about Slick Sand.
Yeah.
The bad thing about it is it's basically just sprayable Bondo.
Right.
It's porous.
243, MP 243.
MP 243.
That's the polyester.
If you wet sand on it and you don't have epoxy underneath it,
don't wet sand on it. Don't wet sand on it, even if you have epoxy underneath it. Ooh. It's porous. It sucks the water in.
Yeah. I mean, it's all that stuff's going to rust out.
Yeah. It's going to hold water too. Yeah. Even if it's got polyester underneath it, it's going to hold the water in that film. So a couple things on these 2 primers, right?
Yeah.
Why would I choose one over the other? Polyester is going to give me speed, cures very fast, and sands very easy.
Yeah. I like the way it sands.
Okay. Nothing wrong with the polyester.
Big build too.
Yes. Lots of build. Needs to be applied with a large fluid tip. Usually a 2.0 to a 2.5. I think the smallest fluid tip they recommend might be a 1.8 or a 1.9.
Yeah, I think 1.8's too big. We go 2.2 or bigger.
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah, you want to go with a bigger fluid tip just because of the nature of it. You're basically spraying Bondo out of a spray gun, right?
I think I got one of my old sodas.
Yeah, maybe you do.
I think it's a 2.6.
Here it is right here.
Is that the Jet B?
That's their polyester gun.
Don't look at the tip size; it'll scare you. You'll say that
it's
they didn't
huge.
make one
Yeah,
that
that's
big.
probably a 2.25. I'm gonna guess, but that's an excellent polyester gun.
Yeah.
It's got the shorter horns on it because if you use a regular standard spray gun with the longer air horns, the polyester builds up real bad on there and causes a mess. This gun is made specifically for polyester. And
What I loved
really
about the
good
slick
gun.
sand, and it's changed a little bit, and there's plenty of things I don't like about it, but we were buying that stuff for less than $100 a gallon, and that comes with the catalyst.
Yeah.
And we would spray 4 coats on there, which, dude, that's crazy. I'm getting 10 plus mils of primer.
Yeah.
And then we would come in with 80 or 100, block it. We would remove a bunch of mils and then guide coat it, block it again with 150, block it, guide coat, block it again with 240. And then if you wanted to urethane it or do something different, you could do that. But it would get it ultra flat, super quick, and it would remove it. But there's advantages to the epoxy. You just did the VP 2050 on your Mustang. What'd you like and dislike about that?
Okay, so it will give you the build of a polyester. And the problem is that you never want to spray it out of this. You want to spray it out of, you could spray it out of just a regular standard primer gun, but you don't want to go any bigger than a 1.6.
Okay.
In fact, I spray it out of a 1.4.
Wow.
Reason being is it builds so fast, it's not a polyester. Polyester, if you put it on real heavy, it's going to cure all the way through. This is an epoxy, so this is a different animal, right? It cures differently. It cures a lot slower. The more film build that I put on, the longer it's going to take to cure. I can tell you for a fact that out of a 1.4, if I put 3 coats of that 2050 down, I'm probably getting 8 to 10 mils out of a 1.4.
That is going to get a lot of hate. No one's going to believe that because a standard
dude, put a mil gauge on it.
Yeah, exactly.
And it may be the way I spray, but I'm telling you, out of a 1.4, I've gotten 8 to 10 mils.
A standard urethane primer gun in my world is a 1.8.
Yeah.
A standard slick sand polyester gun in my world is 2.2 or bigger. And I had trouble with the VP 2050 at first because in my mind, it's a high build primer. It's going to be 1.8 or bigger. And when I went to the smaller tip size, we got better results.
Exactly.
And we still, and it blows my mind that we got the
one thing you're going to get with the 1.4, you're going to get a smaller droplet, so it's going to lay down flatter. Number one. Number two is if you're spraying it on anything big, you're putting, you put a mil gauge on it, you might be at 20 mils. It's not going to dry at 20 mils. It could be a month and the shit's still going to be uncured. Guess what? It's not going to sand. So if you're having a problem sanding 2050, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it sands as easy as polyester, because that to me is the other disadvantage to it. It's an epoxy, so it doesn't sand as easy as a polyester.
Yeah.
But if it's sanding really bad for you, you've probably put way too much of it on.
I like the VP 2050 because it's shiny.
Yes.
And if you use the correct gun and you can get it to lay down, and even though it doesn't sand as nice as what I'm used to with the slick sand, it doesn't take that much longer because it laid out a little better. So it's just different, not better or worse. But you brought up an interesting point. Like, let's say I'm a collision guy. I'm using, a lot of urethanes, or I'm even using water, or I'm using this, that, or the other, and I run something. I'm used to putting heat on it.
Mm-hmm.
Heat will dry everything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, enter our boy epoxy. People think that epoxy is the same as urethanes or polyesters, and
your newer epoxies, yes, heat will take care of them. DP, absolutely not.
It's
absolutely
it could
not.
technically slow it down, and time.
Well, it could skin it over and cause it to slow its cure.
And that's the bad thing about epoxies is that it's not made for production. It's not made for collision. Again, that's going back to the etch versus epoxy thing we're talking about. Is if you're like Johnny in a hurry, I'm gonna prime this thing today and go bare metal to high fill today, then I don't know. You definitely don't want to mess with DPLF, you know.
Stay away from it. It's, I mean, why they still make it is because they've been killing a lot of products lately, and that should have been number one on the list as far as I'm concerned. If you look at the PPG restoration book, there's no DPLF in it. I guarantee, because
little tear came out. Little tear after all these years. Can we have a little moment of silence for not just DP but DPLF?
Yeah. Well, if I had my choice between getting rid of DP or getting rid of lacquer, I would have got rid of the DP.
If I had to guess, this is what people are going to hate on because, you know, and I admit when I first heard you say this is not new. This is a couple years ago.
Yeah,
it's
been a while. Yeah.
And I'm like, no. And we have two cars that we're at the end of. And I said, I'm not changing halfway through the cars. They're all the same. But when these two cars are done, I'm going to be done with DPLF.
Yeah.
We're going to go to the Dell fleet. And I've used it. I
would tell you in the last 10 years, the failures, if I've seen failures on jobs, and I have, normally it's coming from, the first thing I ask is what primer did you use? And if they say DPLF, that's normally where it's at.
Yeah. So I get my polyester or my VP 2050, I get that, you know, in a 4 or 5 or 600 or whatever. I know you guys aren't real big on sealing, but let's talk about that. All right.
Wait a minute.
Well, I'm talking to the home guy who wants to seal. I guess we could go back and forth to seal or not to seal. What sealer are you leaning towards?
Okay, so when we say sealer,
yeah.
How are you using the sealer? Now, they have the term wet on wet, right? And that term is a European term. And what it basically means is you're putting that product down, you're giving it the adequate amount of flash time that it needs, and you're putting a top coat on top of it without sanding it.
Yeah.
That's what wet on wet
has
means.
Nothing to do with how wet or dry spray.
Absolutely not. Okay. Yeah, absolutely not. So what a lot of shops will do is they will either use a polyester primer, which in no way would I ever want to put a top coat over the top of that. You are basically putting top coat over body filler. There's the 2050 that we just talked about that technically you could finish it fine enough and put color over the top of it.
Kind of a pain in the ass.
A lot of people would prefer to put maybe a colored undercoat, like now it's white, gray, and black or dark gray. They would probably choose to put something like that over the top of it to get closer to maybe what the vehicle is that they're going to paint, the color they're going to paint. Some cases, people are going to want to put a urethane primer down. Okay, I'm going to go back to that urethane primer and tell you that if you put more than 2 coats of that down, expect to see some shrinkage later on down the road.
Yeah. Is there a way to combat it, though?
Sure. Use a sealer.
Okay.
For that final prime, instead of using a urethane primer, use a urethane sealer. The difference between a urethane primer and a urethane sealer is you've got a higher resin content in the sealer. That resin content will hold out better. It won't shrink as bad. Okay, whereas a surfacer, they use more talc. Talc is like a powder. It's a pigment that they put in. That's what makes it sand real easy. Okay, you're going to give up a little bit of that sandability with the sealer, but the benefit is going to be no shrinkage.
Let's say I'm doing a black car, base coat, clear coat.
Yep.
What grit is the primer in before you do your sealer as your final prime trick? What's your range?
So what I'll do is I'm going to finish either my polyester or my 2050 or my high build epoxy. Probably going to finish that in 320 to 400.
Okay.
Then I'm going to take a sealer. And we'll kind of talk about what the best ones are to use there, but I will put usually 2 coats of sealer down.
Okay.
And I will let that set at least overnight. Now I can come back and final sand that sealer with 600 to 800 grit, depending on what type of color. If it's black, I'm probably going to finish
running
it with
a Dynabrade over it. All up on angle.
Once the car's in bare metal, it never sees a DA ever again.
So what
DA
kind of
is for production work?
Yeah. So what are you're not wet sanding it? You're probably dry.
That's that's a choice.
Yeah.
Some people still like the wet sand. Personally, I like to dry sand.
Yeah.
I'll guide coat it and dry sand it.
I still like wet sanding. And,
Yeah,
and again,
and
I
that's
know
fine.
there's a lot of people out there that like wet
And
sanding.
you can guide coat and wet sand too.
But with the modern sandpapers not in all spots, but in 99% of the spots that we used to wet sand, the sandpaper technology is through the roof. And I mean, maybe like wet sanding, clear coat and stuff, you still got to work around it too. In most cases, you don't have to wet sand anymore.
Well, clear coat,
Clear coat,
absolutely wet
But
sand.
but
just
before
because
paint,
the paper lasts so much longer.
Yeah. So what are you using? Hard block, soft block? What are you using with that 6-800 before you put your color?
Well,
aka
by
your
the
base
time you
down?
get to that point, the car better be straight.
Yeah.
If you're trying to make stuff straight with that sealer, you haven't done the job right.
Yeah.
So you shouldn't need anything more than a good backup block of some sort. I mean, I have on large flat areas, I'll maybe start with a plexiglass
Okay.
block, but normally it's a good hard rubber.
You ever use any of those linear blocks?
Yes.
Do you?
Yes.
What do
Actually,
you,
I'm doing a class with him in September.
what do you think about his blocks?
Excellent. They're excellent blocks. Yeah.
Like I'm a big 3M guy. Like you better be 3M quality sandpaper or whatever. You like his sandpaper?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
And I mean that's kind of a bold statement.
Yeah,
'cause,
he's got you can get 600 or 800 with a sticky back and use it for wet sand. It works great. It's fabulous.
People bitch about the cost of those linear blocks, but it's a cry
tool.
once, buy once steal.
It's a tool.
Yeah.
You buy quality tools, don't buy junk.
And again, I don't. We're not sponsored by Linear Block, not yet. Go ahead, DM me. No, like people talk about like Durablocks. I like Durablocks for mud, for Bondo, for production,
production.
But they're not. If you're going to compare,
take a Durablock, and I'm like, I'll use a little Durablock.
it looks like
for
a 2x4 from Home Depot.
for sanding that sealer. I'll use that little square Durablock as a backup. But you take a long block from Durablock and go ahead and block a panel. Now guide coat it. Now use a piece of plexiglass or use a linear block or something like that, and you'll be amazed at how much you missed with the Durablock.
And again, if you're doing production work down at ABC Collision, there's nothing wrong with Durablocks. But if you get their $100 kit on Amazon, but you run your hand down that bad boy, even brand new, and then you take linear blocks,
they're not
even
straight.
close.
No.
Not even close.
No.
And again, we're not sponsored by anybody. Is we used to buy plexi and cut it and make it, or buy wood, cut it and make it. But his stuff is sweet, man.
It is. It's nice stuff.
It sucks to buy it the first time, but then it also sucks to have all this time and money into a car, and then you get it out there and it's got a little wave in it or a big wave or whatever. I don't know. That's just me. So hopefully you didn't burn through your sealer, and then you come in and then
I mean, if you do burn through your sealer, you just go in and hit a little spot.
a little bit.
Yeah.
And then let's just say that we're using, since we're going black, we're going to be solvent. And how many coats of base? Like, let's say it's DBC 9700.
Well,
how many coats of base?
What's funny
are
about
you doing?
sealers, and I don't know about any other paint companies.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know. I've never used their sealer. I don't know what it sands like. In the PPG line, I can tell you that the EnviroBase ECS 20 series, 21, 25, 27. 21's white, 25 is gray, 27 is dark gray or black. They call it black, but it's dark gray.
Yeah.
I like using those because they sand the easiest. Okay, I don't know why, they just do. Okay, if you get into the Deltron sealer, which is the DAS 21, 25, or no.
Yeah, we used to use the Global, the 88, 1, 3, 5, and 7, or is it 8,000? But I think they're getting rid of all of those.
Yeah, they're getting rid of those. Now it's
because I just went to a new NXT.
But it's still DAS.
Oh, it's
21,
still the DAS?
25,
Okay.
27.
What was that,
yeah.
V-Seal? Is that what they used
It's
to call it?
V-Seal,
Okay.
yeah.
All
For
right.
whatever reason, the resin in that is a lot slower than the
Doesn't
stuff.
sand as nice.
It doesn't sand as nice.
Yeah.
You can sand if you're going to wet sand it. It's okay.
Yeah, it gets
But
a little gummy.
Yeah. Yeah, and they'll say, well, you can't put solvent over EnviroBase sealer. Yeah, you can if you let it completely cure overnight, do not use the new 80 series that's an Enviro base
Okay.
because it does not
So
work
what's the
with
sealer
solvent.
that you like, if not V-Seal?
ECS
Okay.
20 series,
20 series,
21,
not the
25,
80
not the
series.
80 series.
Okay.
21, 25, 27. Again, guys, it's just PPG stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know about the other ones.
PPG, you owe us like 10% of the sales over the next 30 days. All right, just a little something small.
But that's for that final prime, and then I'm going to sand it before I put my color on it.
And then you throw how many coats of base down?
Whatever it takes to cover.
If we're black, you ever sand your base, manipulate your base if it's got some peel?
Try not to.
Yeah.
I try to get it to lay as smooth as I can. If you're sanding it prior to putting it on, it's going to lay down a lot smoother for you.
Okay.
It's going to look a lot better. Solvent selection's going to kind of be critical on your base, if you're using solvent base. Water base, you're kind of at the mercy of water.
Then let's say you get your base. If you did have to sand your base, I'm not talking about a run, but let's just say
you get a chunk of dirt or something.
Yeah. What grit do you like doing that with?
I try to go as fine as I can.
Okay.
1,000, 1,500,
Okay.
800 maybe, but
all right.
you got to make sure it's dry.
If you sand your base, are you rebasing?
Absolutely,
what you sand?
yeah.
Okay. All right. And then
well, especially metallic color.
Yeah. What clear coat are you leaning towards?
In the PPG line?
Yeah.
My favorite is it used to be Global 8152, is now in the NXT line.
Yeah.
It's DC
5050. Why the hell did they change the name?
It's a marketing thing.
Okay. That's dumb.
I don't know. Marketing people know more than the customers, I guess.
The old 8152, now we call it 5050.
50-50.
What do you think about, like, I know 2021 is still a crowd flavor.
Yeah, still a big one.
What's your thoughts about, and they're about the same amount of money.
Probably 50-50 is probably a little more.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, probably. I don't know.
What's your thoughts about, why would you choose 50-50 over 2021, I guess?
I think it's a little higher and solid.
Okay.
I think the clarity is better, that when you do that final sand and rub, it has a more crisp look to it. The advantage to 2021 is that it's a little more workable, as far as I think I can pile it on a little more. You can stack it a little better without worrying about solvent pop, things like that.
Okay.
It's a little faster as far as getting back on it to sand and polish it.
Okay.
And then, watch the additives you use in that. For years, everybody used 61 hardener. I don't use 61 hardener. I use 8 or 9.
So
DCX 8.
I did want to ask you that. That was in my notes. The bad thing is we're almost we're over an hour into this now.
Yeah.
I wanted to keep it as short as possible, and maybe I'll have to beg you to come back for a round 3 later in life.
If you need it.
Oh, there's I only hit on 1/10 of the questions.
Because we haven't even started sanding and rubbing yet.
I know, right? No, we didn't, the guide code on the rubbing trick and stuff like that. I would love to get into that. But, so if I was using, let's say, DCC single stage or 2021 or even 2042 clears, I could use DCX 8, DCX 9, or DCX 61.
Yeah.
Give me just a real quick on which hardener would I use?
Okay, so 61 was always the most popular. And the reason that was the most popular was because it sanded and rubbed easy. The disadvantage to 61 is it has very little mar resistance. So if I take a polishing rag or there's dust on it or something like that, it scratches very easy. DCX 8 will give you a faster cure, and it gives you way better mar resistance. You're going to lose a little bit of rubbability on it, but with the technology we have today with the 3,000, 5,000 grits, rubbability should never be an issue with any of these hardeners. Okay, you will lose a little bit of gloss with the 8 initially, but when you sand and polish it, it'll be fine. DCX 9 is a little more, it gives you a little more flow. You would tend to use that more if you're in a bake booth, where 8 you could use a little easier air dryer in your garage or something like that. 9 will give you the same good mar resistance. It'll give you a better gloss level, and it will flow a little bit better for you.
Okay. I did want to end a little bit on wet sanding and wheeling. I mean, comment if you want Jeff to come back and we can get deeper into some primers. We can go waterborne versus solvent, air compressor setups, guns, like what guns does he like, tip size and all that. But I did want to ask you these questions. Again, we're talking show car only stuff. We're not talking like, garage painting and how to save a buck. Is you got your 4 coats of clear on of your 50/50 or whatever clear, and it came out good. There's no runs. There's not a lot of dirt. What grit are you starting with?
I've been starting with 6.
Okay, 600 grit.
Yeah.
Okay.
You got to make sure you got enough clear on there.
And that right there, Collision World, you like, I start with 1,500.
Well, you want it flat, right?
And you're using those linear blocks, and you're coming in and blocking with the 600.
Linear blocks or some sort of plexiglass.
Yep.
Yes.
And then you're not, we used to go 6,000 to 8,000, but you're not going 6,000 to 8,000. Aren't you going 6,000?
Yeah.
So you're skipping 8. How do you know that you're not over or understanding?
Guide coat.
So you're spraying on guide coat?
Nope.
No?
Powder guide coat.
Okay.
And the best one I found so far is Merca. They make a black and a white. So if you got a light car, you go with black. If you got a dark colored car, the white is fantastic. Seriously, it changed my life.
No, I agree. We've been doing this for a long time. And what I love about this move is that you don't over or understand, because they're both could be very, very bad things in the world of,
right.
Not
if you understand, you're going to leave, because it's real easy to leave a 600 scratch. But if you guide coat it properly, you'll see it, every bit of it with 1,000 grit, take it out, and then you keep guide coating between sanding.
600 guide coat,
1,000,
and then you guide coat in again.
Guide coat 1,500. Guide coat 2,000.
Okay.
Guide coat 2,500.
Okay.
Then I start in with my 3,000 Trizac. Usually I stop at 3,000. Okay. You can go to 5, but you're not getting much out of it.
So you're doing 3, then buff, but some guys do the 3, 5, 8 Trizac.
You could,
okay.
if you're that much of a lunatic. Yeah.
I think it makes a difference.
That's a lot of sanding, man.
It is. I don't use, what I do is I do the 6. It took me forever to do what you're doing is jump the 8.
Yeah.
And
once you've sanded with 6 and 1,000, you're really not cutting much material off anymore. And again, you can use a mill gauge to see how much you're taking off. But if you're guide coating, that's going to keep you from over sanding.
It was hard for me because I would go, back in the day, I would go 6, 8,000, 15.
Yeah.
I didn't do 2. I did 3,000, 5,000, 8,000, and I liked it. I stopped guide coating after the 15.
Yeah.
But I recently did do the 6,000 and skip the 8, and dude, I hated it at first. It just, just because it's different, and it works great.
Yeah.
And it cuts a whole step out, and I'm a big believer in it. What compounds are you using?
I've been using the Rupus system.
Okay.
Yeah.
We don't have time to get into all that.
No,
I would love to talk about that.
I just, whether you use that or something else, that's fine. What I have completely gotten away from is a rotary.
Oh my God. I need another
and
hour.
a lot of guys will argue with me on that one too, because a rotary is still faster, and I will admit that a rotary is faster. I just love the look I get with an orbital, and because I don't see the wheel marks, and there's no, I hit it with the initial cut of the orbital and it looks beautiful, and then you hit it with the next step and you're like, holy shit, this looks amazing.
Well, unfortunately, we are going to have to wrap this up, but I want to have Jeff back. If you guys want to have him, comment down below. Do you want to talk about water versus solvent? Do you want to talk about rotaries? Do you want to talk about different buffing? What kind of paint and body stuff do you want to know? And we haven't started paying Jeff to be on the show yet, but we may have to in the future. But thank you, Jeff Matauch, for coming on. As always, Gary from Refinish Media, Dave behind the mic. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us and comment below. Thank you.
Wow, you made it to the end of the video. Thank you so much. If you like what we're doing here, go ahead and click a like. You can follow us. In the future, we're going to release more videos, all on automotive content, so look for us in the future. Thanks for watching.